Hey everybody, it's Mahadeva, the OG Thunder Wizard. Alright, so I want to go off topic from what I've been talking about recently and get back to some core Thunder Wizard stuff. Let's talk about the runes. Specifically let's talk about the origin of the runes. Before I go any further, if you're new to the channel, we've got a couple of exciting things going on. First, if you're interested in getting the most out of this channel, don't just watch these free YouTube videos on this channel. This is just the tip of the iceberg. If you really want the power to change your life, to become a sorcerer, a shaman, a wizard, whatever it is, whatever words you want to use, go up here to thunderwizard.com. Click around and look at the various subscription levels. You'll get master's level teaching in various subjects, including the runes. All right, and for those of you who are also following the channel, we have the Dr. Manhattan package, which is going to expire in just a couple of days. So you are going to save $6,000 on all of the stuff that I teach, and you'll have access. You'll even save money on the Maoshan 5-element Kung Fu forms, which you can go look at maoshan.thunderwizard.com. But if you like it and you see and you want to get that, go to Dr. Manhattan, Dr. no period, drmanhattan.thunderwizard.com. It's going to be running out in just a couple of days. All right, let's get to it. So, as you know, if you follow my channel, you know that I've written 3 books on the runes. You don't know that I've written 3 books on runes? Shame on you for not spending time going to all of the links when I have them here on the channel. So you can go to courses.thunderwizard.com. That's courses.thunderwizard.com. You can see my books and everything else that I offer. I've written 3 books on runes. And in that book, I talk about my belief on the origin of the runes. And in light of recent DNA and archaeological evidence in terms of the origins of the Indo-European culture and religion, I've had to rethink some of the things that I was saying. My basic premise still stands for me, which is that it is my belief that the runes were, before they were written down as an alphabet, as a physical writing alphabet, they were an oral tradition that was handed down from father to son all the way back into Ice Age times. So I believe the runes to be a purely Northern European invention, and it was a tradition that has survived to this day and has gone through some, now I think it has gone through some transformations in order to arrive at its current state of being. So if you read my books, I have talked about the origin of the Indo-European language and religion, and I have since changed my mind on that. And, you know, I'm happy to do that. I don't have an ego attachment to what I believe. If somebody can show me with scientific, verifiable evidence, I'm happy to use critical thinking and adopt the truth, whether I like it or not. So what I was writing about in my books was that I believed that, that's what I used to believe, I believed that the Indo-European language and religion was something that was brought into Europe from the first modern humans, and that I was very passionately against the idea of the Aryan migration theory. I had real problems with it. And there is a controversy to this day, which I didn't participate in, but there is a controversy surrounding this as well. And so you have a lot of people in India, and you have a lot of Westerners who follow yogic practices, who have a strong affiliation towards Hindu and Vedic practices. And they have an opposite take on it. It's a reactionary theory, which is, no, it wasn't an Aryan migration. It was, it wasn't that there were these white-skinned Europeans that came into India and brought the Vedic tradition, but it was the other way around. It was that East Indian, Sanskrit-speaking Vedic peoples went and colonized the rest of Europe. So we've got these two, and this is, again, this shows an emotional agenda. Because whenever you've got an emotional agenda, people think in black and white terms. They don't think in the middle. There's never a third option. There's just one thing or the other. And so you had people who have been making the argument since the 1700s that blonde-haired, blue-eyed Europeans came down into India and founded India. And of course, the British, when they colonized India, they used this as a way to dominate and control and enslave, and otherwise disenfranchise the indigenous Indian people. So understandably, you've got people from India who are like, hey man, who the hell are you, you foreigner coming in here telling us the origins of our thing? So they react emotionally and they say, no, it's the other way around. That we invaded Europe and your language and your culture comes from us. And then nobody thinks that there's a third possibility. So I personally don't care. I swear to you, I have no personal agenda on any of it. But the objective evidence is clear. The objective evidence from the Vedas is pretty clear. I mean, somebody whom I respect a lot sent me a link to something, and I'm not quite sure what the study was trying to say, but I think it's feeding into the out of India theory, which just doesn't hold any water. And unfortunately, it's sad that I think there's a lot of people that use their emotional agendas to drive their opinions. But to be honest, a lot of it is over my head, and I didn't really know what I was reading. I just got that vibe from it. In any case, I'll look into that more, and if I learn more about it, I'll let you know. But based on the scientific information that we have now, and based on the Vedas themselves, the Vedas are the writings of the Vedic people. In fact, I believe one of the oldest, if not the oldest, written Indo-European language, which lends credence to the idea that Sanskrit, the language of the East Indian Vedics, may be the closest existing written language that we have that is closest to the original Indo-European language. So, back to the runes. What does this have to do with the runes? Well, the runes are unique to the Germanic people. And in my books on runes, I take modern runic scholars to task because they're just simply regurgitating stuff that's been thrown at them from academia, which has been inaccurate. I still have problems with the Aryan migration theory as it was taught. The way it's been taught for hundreds of years and the way it was taught to me when I was in college back in the 80s. Holy crap, it was a long time ago. The way it was taught to me was that there were these blonde-haired, blue-eyed, light-skinned horse warriors that came charging out of the steppes of the Ukraine, actually, the Pontic steppes of Central Asia, came screaming out of there and dominated all of Europe and parts of the Middle East and the Near East. That's where we get our religion, etc., etc. I didn't like it because it was so clearly racist. There was such a clear racist agenda behind it. And there wasn't a lot of science behind it. There was a little bit of science and then a whole lot of conjecture. And it was used by racists in all kinds of really nasty ways. The Nazis used it in really horrible ways. It turns out to be wrong on a bunch of different levels. So I had a problem with that, and so I preferred the Paleolithic continuity paradigm, which you can go look at here. Why can't I chat here? What the heck's going on? Let me refresh this page. Because I want to write this down for you. Go check out the Paleolithic continuity paradigm, which I am telling you now I no longer subscribe to. The reason why I subscribe to it is because it fit with my emotional agenda, and it operated from a scientific and a critical thinking level that I liked. And I'm just telling you, this is, again, we talk about critical thinking, and this is, I hope you can see in my experience, because I try and show you my experience. I don't try and hide my humanity in any way. But this is critical thinking. Critical thinking says that as a human, you may have some emotional agendas, and that those emotional agendas may very well cloud your ability to see the truth. So while I held on to the willingness to be wrong, my emotional agenda did drive me into accept the Paleolithic continuity paradigm, because I did not like the alternative. The alternative was that there was this one group of people, this one culture, that within a matter of just a couple thousand years ended up completely dominating, which would have meant large-scale invasions, warfare, slaughter of indigenous peoples. It would have been pretty horrific. And the imposition of their language and their culture, and the destruction of the pre-existing indigenous culture and language and religion. And I didn't like that idea. And so the Paleolithic continuity paradigm said, hey, we have a bunch of evidence that says this language came directly from Africa 50,000 years ago, and that language changes very slowly over time. And what you have is people who are ethnically changing. Their DNA is evolving based on their environment, but their language and their religion stays the same. And so that's why you have people in India who are dark-skinned, and you have people in Iceland who have blonde hair and blue eyes, but they're all Indo-Europeans, and they're ethnically different, etc., etc. And so that sat well with me, because those are my morals. And I have a hard time with the idea of identifying with some group of people that might not be very nice. They might be mean, brutal, warrior-like people and hurting others, and I don't like that. But with recent DNA evidence and more extensive archaeological evidence, it seems pretty clear that that is what happened. However, I want to make some changes on some things. Now, what the racists will tell you is that the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Germanic warrior is the original Indo-European person, and so that's where they buy into the whole racist thing. And so that's where Hitler got his pure race and all that, and associating it with blonde hair and blue eyes. But from what we see, that's not who the Indo-European people were. The Vedas make it pretty clear that the Aryans, which just means they call themselves the noble ones, the Aryans came from another place, and that there was according to that, it looks like there might have been a ecological change, what's the word I'm looking for? A climate shift. So there may have been a climate shift that started making them look for greener pastures. And so they came down from where they were and they migrated into what is now Pakistan. And that's the beginnings of the Vedic culture in India. And then, of course, they spread into all of India. And the indigenous people there, they called the Dravidians. And they made it clear that the Dravidians were much darker skinned people. And so there was a racial difference between the Vedics and the Dravidians. And so that's pretty clear. It's pretty obvious that the Vedics came from someplace north of Pakistan and came down. So that was part of that's what drove a lot of the Aryan migration theory from that. That's where the word Aryan comes from, because the Vedics called themselves the Aryans. It was then later that Europeans in the 1700s and then, followed up with the Nazis, they started talking about the Aryans being these blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. Now, I'm not trying to say that the original Vedics didn't have some of those characteristics, but we know from now archaeological DNA evidence of what seems to be the original homeland of the Indo-European people, which now we refer to as the Yamnaya culture. So where is that? So that's what we have right here. So let's take a look at this. This is now very similar to what I was taught in college. Sorry, these Bronze Age guys, let's get them out of the picture there for a second. So in what is now Ukraine, of course, some people get so bent out of shape in such weird ways. So let's just be clear. These are modern names of the locations. This is not the name of the locations at the time that it happened, whenever it was 7,000 years ago. This is the modern location of Ukraine. It is the Pontic Steppes. It's this grassland. Just grassland it's Kansas. It's grassland for as far as the eye can see. And this is where these people came from. And so we call them the Indo-Europeans. That's for obvious reasons, because the Indo-European language is found in India and in Europe, therefore Indo-European, right? That's what that means. So let me see, what was I doing? This is what I want. So I'm going to get this now small again. Let's get this guy back down to size. Right, so you can see those arrows, there's a pretty good indication that that's where they came from and that's where they went. And you can see all of the Indo-European cultures there. You can see the Celtic culture, you can see the Latin culture. They go down into Italy there. You can see the Greek as they go down into Greece. There was a whole Indo-European culture which no longer exists in what is now Turkey. That's been interspersed with all people from East Asian people have come over and brought their language and their culture, and so anyways, it's not like it used to be. And then of course you see all the arrows going down into India, and there was briefly a Indo-European culture that went all the way into China, the Tocharians. The Tocharians were Indo-European people who lived in the steppes of what is now China. They no longer exist either. They've been subsumed into the indigenous other indigenous cultures there. So the question of the runes is something that I find really interesting, because the runes do not follow any other Indo-European. I'm going to get distracted by the comments here, so I got to cover them up. The runes are distinctly different from any other alphabet, and distinct from any other oral magical tradition in the world. Now, what is similar, what is Indo-European about it, clearly, is the words. So each one of the runes, you know, we have, starting with fehu. Fehu means cow. Comes from the same word where we get in Latin pecus. You've heard of a cowboy named Pecos Bill. Anybody who's called Pecos Bill? Pecos means cow. It's Latin for cow. So in the Germanic it was pronounced fehu. It's the same word. In the Sanskrit it was pashu. That means cow. Fehu. It's one of the words for cow. You have a bunch of other Indo-European words. There's some that we might not know, like the perthro. Based on my research, we don't really know where the word perthro came from. So we don't know if it's Indo-European or not. But the rest of the words are all Indo-European words. And they're ascribed these different letters. So the words themselves are not the runes. You can chant, like if you want to get the fehu rune, you can chant fehu. Fehu. But it's the sound of fe. Fe is the sound that is going to give you the power. The uruz rune. Uruz comes from the same word as oryx, and it is the prehistoric ancestor to modern day cows. And so the Germanic people pronounced it uruj. But the sound that you want is the ur sound, or the u sound. That's where the power comes from. So maybe you get where I'm going here. What I'm talking about here is that the actual sounds of the letters are not necessarily associated with the runic words themselves. They're just a way of remembering the sounds. So the question is, did the runes, Futhark, F-U-T-H-A-R-K, did these letters, did the Germanic people come up with this purely from their Indo-European roots? Because it's clear the Germanic people are Indo-Europeans. If we look at the Germanic people from a genetic standpoint, we will see that they are directly descended, or that there is a large percentage of their DNA, not all of it, but a large percentage of their DNA comes directly from these horse warriors who came bursting out of the Pontic steppes at 5000 BC and brought with them the knowledge of horse riding, and they brought with them knowledge of farming. They brought with them knowledge of technology of the wheel, and using chariots, and they were pastoralists, which means that they had animals. They had horses, obviously. They had cows, they had sheep, and they brought this knowledge to Europe. And so when you look at any European population that speaks an Indo-European language, you are going to find a mixture genetically. You're going to find a mixture of these Indo-European horse warriors and a mixture of other indigenous people and people from other parts of the world, like Anatolia, in prehistoric times, Ice Age times. So before I forget about it, let's get rid of some of the racist garbage associated with the Germanic people and Indo-Europeans and Aryans. So let's be clear about one thing. The Aryans that came into India were not Germanic people. They did not have the same racial setup. They didn't look identical. They weren't blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. These were not the people that came into India. They were of a different ethnicity than the local Dravidians, who were similar to, as it so happens, the Australians and other people like the, I forget the name of the island chain there, but the islands around India, Fiji, a lot of similarity to the people in New Guinea. So ethnically, they were more akin to those. Looked a lot more, quote, African, much darker skinned. So there was a clear racial difference between the two. But these people who came into India were not Germanic, quote, Nazi Aryans. The people who came out of the Ukraine, that purple spot there in the middle of the map, those people had brown eyes. It was, we know, I mean, they might have had other colors. They might have had hazel eyes, but they might have had, light eyes too. But we know for a fact they were brown-eyed people. We also know that they were olive-skinned, many of them. They had a lot of the same facial features that you see on me, the nose. In fact, some of their noses were really pointy, big and pointy. So you see that in some people. You see that in some, like some British people. You see these big, pointy, kind of hook noses. But a lot of these features that you see on me, you would have seen on these people. I have green eyes. So there's a good chance that my green eyes do not come from the Indo-European people, from the Yamnaya people. Green eyes in Britain, we know from excavations of Ice Age people, that there were people there in Britain who had very dark skin, and they had jet black hair, and they had green eyes. And so there was all different there was a whole different makeup ethnically in Europe at the time of this Indo-European invasion. In terms of who was living in what was the original homeland of the Proto-Germanic people, which is in Scandinavia. The home of the Proto-Germanic people was not, Germany proper, it was Scandinavia. And in Scandinavia, you had, ethnically, you had a group of hunter-gatherer people who had blonde hair and blue eyes. They did not have horses, they did not have the technology of the wheel. They were hunter-gatherers. They were, like you would, any Stone Age person. They had bows and arrows, and they walked around and they grabbed, berries and fruits and nuts, and they hunted for food, and they, that's how they survived. So the Indo-European people, when they started to go into this area, which was now the home of the Proto-Germanic people, they must have conquered and dominated those people, and or those people were, as is today, a lot of people, they migrate to the United States or they migrate to Europe, and after 2 or 3 generations, they've completely lost their ethnic, ancestral language, culture, and religion. So it was had to have been a combination of these things, where you had these horse warriors coming in and either conquering, killing the men, taking the wives, taking the women as wives, or there must have been an overwhelming need, either from suppression or just a desire to better their lives. They must have adopted Indo-European language, culture, and religion. So, one of the other theories that I really didn't like, and I still don't, because it doesn't pan out, is you had a lot of people who were into Germanic mythology and magic, who, you still have this split. You have people who are very racialistic, so a lot of the neo-heathen stuff is, it's just Nazism hiding under something else, and they're using Germanic mythology and religion as a justification for their racism. And these people don't have a problem with what I'm saying. You know, this idea of somebody coming in and dominating and controlling, and they don't have a problem with that. But on the other side, you have people who tend to be more right-brained, who are more artistic, more more artistic and more feeling-oriented. And these are the people who are into magic and all that kind of stuff. A lot in that whole group of people, you will hear a different theory that that there was a combination of maternal earth goddess worshipping people, and then the male oriented horse warriors, the Indo-Europeans, came in, and so the resulting religion was this combination of the indigenous goddess worship combined with, this is what people say the Aesir-Vanir war is about. They'll say, oh, the Vanir are the indigenous magical goddess worshipping indigenous people, and the Aesir are the gods of the Indo-Europeans, and that's why there's this war. And that's just absolutely false. Completely, totally false. It's a whole different thing. I've explained that in other videos. But I don't like that, again, because I don't like people projecting their emotions onto things and all that. And as with myself, I'm willing to get rid of my emotional attachments in favor of objective truth. So what must have happened is that these slightly darker skinned Indo-European horse warriors came in, and however it happened, I think it's probably a combination of conquest and maybe even genocide, enslavement, where the men are killed and the women are taken as wives, and or just cultural, being culturally absorbed, because when you've got a more functional culture, people tend to throw away what doesn't work and gravitate towards what does work. There may have been, an upper and lower class, and so when you've got that, the lower class tends to throw away what they're attached to, and they want to emulate the upper class. And so I think this is pretty clear that this is what happened all over Europe. Genetically, we have all different kinds of things going on, but we can see that thread of these Yamnaya, these horse warrior who came in and over, it looks like 2,000 or 3,000 years, completely, totally transformed the Northwestern Hemisphere. So now we're back to the runes again. So where did the runes come from? Some of the so-called runic experts, again, will spout what they've heard from I write about this in my books, what they've heard from academia, which is that Germanic mercenaries fighting in the Mediterranean adopted Mediterranean the use of Mediterranean alphabet and writing, and came back to their Germanic tribal homelands, and from that the runes were developed. And that is pure conjecture. There is zero historical evidence for this. This is pure conjecture. What we can say is that, like, for instance, the words fehu, uruz, those kinds of things, the majority of them are Indo-European words. We can see the similarity of the actual characters, the lines that are carved in. Those look very similar and are identical to characters that were used by, for instance, the Etruscans. The Etruscans were the first to use to use alphabets in Italy, and they got those, I think from the Greeks and whomever else. So that way of writing script definitely did come from the Etruscans and the Romans, for sure. But the Etruscans, the Romans, even the Hebrews, they all use the same order. So it's alpha, beta, gamma, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That is the same, whether it's Latin, whether it's Etruscan, whether it's Hebrew. It's the same letters. So if these supposed mercenaries, Germanic mercenaries, who went down and fought in Etruria or in Italy or in wherever the hell it was in Spain and came back with this supposed alphabet, they would come back with the same alphabet that the Latins had. They would come back and it would be Ansuz, Berchtana, Kenaj, Dagaj. It would be in that order. There's literally no reason for them to take those letters and put them in a completely different, totally unique order, which you do not find anywhere else in the world. So it doesn't make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, it means that there's something else going on. The other reason why it doesn't make sense is because the Germanic tribes did not have a unified government or culture or homeland. So it wasn't like they came back to Germany. It didn't exist. There was a bunch of different tribal people who happened to have a similar language. The language was mutually intelligible. So unlike the idiots who made that stupid, I enjoyed it, but the history was just so fucking awful. And it was the History Channel of the Vikings, where you have these Norse people who can't communicate with the Anglo-Saxons. And we have historical written evidence from the Vikings themselves who say that Anglo-Saxon was their language. It was the same language. They said, they even write, they speak the same language as we do. Which means that Old English and Old Norse, even though they were a different dialect, they were the same language. You could talk to each other and there would be some slight differences, but you knew exactly what the other person was saying. So all of that garbage in that Viking series where they don't know, that we hear of this magical land to the west, all of that is nonsense. They knew exactly where England was. They weren't idiots, and they spoke the same language. Anyway, you get where I'm going with it. So there would have been no reason for these people to not have created the runes in the exact same format as the Etruscans and the Latins and the Greeks and even the Hebrews, non-Indo-European people. There would have been no reason for them not to put it in the same order. So why do we have the runes in the order of Fehu, Uruj, Thurisaz, Ansuz, Raidu, Kenaj? Why do we have that? Futhark. You can't find it anywhere else in the world. My belief, my common sense tells me that it was an oral tradition. An oral tradition of using the sounds. How do you memorize the sounds? How do you give meaning to them? You take the language that you're using and you take the beginning, so f, to remember the f sound, you say fehu. Oh, you mean like the cow over there? Yeah, fehu. So that's the first one. You're teaching your little kid how to learn this knowledge of the sacred syllables and the sounds and the power that they carry. So you use words so that they can remember. Fehu. Uruj. Uruj is power. Oh, the oraks, the uruj. Thurisaj, which means giant. So you take all these same words that are in your modern language of, at that point, Indo-European, the Germanic language, but I believe that the actual practice itself was a pre-Indo-European Ice Age tradition. I can't prove it, obviously. I don't know that that can be proven or disproven, but there's no evidence to suggest anything otherwise. In fact, the fact that it's a completely different word order that is used by letter order, used by all of the Germanic tribes, tells me that the order itself of the letters, or the sounds associated with the letters, that order must come from a time when the Proto-Germanic people were unified. So at one point in time, you had the Proto-Germanic people who spoke one language, they were one culture, they were one, extended tribe, and then as they went out and they spread out and they became these more and more independent, loosely associated tribes who had similar but not identical languages, etc., etc. You see where I'm going with this? So those are my musings about where the runes came from. And I find it really interesting. If my current theory, which is completely unprovable, is true, then it means that the Germanic religion, which is strongly associated with the runes, the Germanic religion comes from a combination of the pre-Indo-European, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, pre-Indo-European hunter-gatherers who lived in Scandinavia there, and a combination of their shamanic religion and combining it with the Indo-European religion that was coming in from the Yamnaya culture, which the things that are the same about the Germanic religion and the Vedic religion, what's identical shows you, you go back in time, it'll show you what the original Indo-European religion was. Now, one of the most interesting things that I find about this, based on what I've seen in terms of the research, is that the Proto-Germanic people were one of the first Indo-European offshoots. So in terms of time, one of the first Indo-European independent cultures that arises out of this this migration of these Indo-European horse warriors. One of the first ones is the Germanic. And in fact, the Germanic Indo-European tradition, culture, and the ethnicity, everything seems to be even older. From what I've seen, I'm open to being wrong about this, but from what I've seen, they're even older than the Vedic. So by the time the Vedic people come together and identify as the Vedic Aryans, and their religion and their culture and their specific language of Sanskrit, it seems that is even a later crystallization. So if you want to go further back into the a more primitive, a more early form of the Indo-European religion, the Germanic is a pretty good, potentially, a pretty good example. Now, I've always felt this way because, for instance, the names of the gods tend to be more primitive in the Germanic tradition. In the Vedic tradition, for instance, the god of the sky father, his name is Dieus Pita. So that name actually means sky father. Dieus, sky, Pita, father. Dieus Pita. And in the Germanic, it's just Dieu. It's just sky. They don't even bother putting the word father after it. Sky. Same thing with fertility. So the god of fertility in the Vedic tradition is, I should be writing this down. So in the Vedic, the sky father is Dieus Pita, sky father. The Germanic is simply Dieu, which means sky. The root there is D or D. Zeus, by the way, Zeus is a good example. Zeus is the vocative declension of D. So again, with the Greek, you just have the word sky. So the god, the sky father, his name is just sky. But in the Vedic, you have a more complicated, which is Dieus Pita, sky father. In terms of fertility, you have a root Indo-European word for fertility, which is pra. It means to expand. So it's obvious. It means the expansion of life. Okay? So that's the Indo-European word for fertility. In fact, the word fertility, fer comes from pra. Fer, pra. It's the same root. And the god of fertility in the Germanic is Fre. That's just a Germanic pronunciation of the root pra. The god of fertility in the Vedic is Prajapati, which means the husband of the feminine power of fertility, because you have pra and praja. This is in Sanskrit, by the way. Pra and praja. Pra is the male, it's the masculine, and praja is the feminine. Praja means the power of pra. So for those of you, people who think that men have all the power, women have all the power. So Prajapati is the pati, the husband of the feminine power of fertility. So point I'm trying to make is that it's more complicated. The word itself shows a less primitive way of looking at the gods. So that means the more you get to the more primitive, the more basic interface with the god or the goddess, that in my thinking shows a more ancient original understanding. And according to the Roman historian Tacitus, the Germanic people were incredibly primitive. And so this was 2,000 years ago when the Romans went in and started exploring. When they were exploring what was Germania, it would be identical to somebody in the 1700s exploring the jungles of the Amazon. It was the same. They didn't know what was there. They had all these mythical ideas of the creatures. They had idea that there were people with 3 heads, and you can read the Roman historians talking about, and in this people we have people with 3 heads, and there are people that are 100 feet tall, and they have all this fantastical stuff about the people that live there. So that area of Europe, which we now associate with Germany, was actually a hugely thick forest of swamps. It was swamps and forests and mountains, and it was hard to traverse. The reason why the Romans never conquered the interior Germanic tribespeople is because they couldn't get their war machine in there. It was just too much of a jungle. And so the Germanic tribespeople could just come out of the bushes and from all sides and devastate them. So point being is that what I'm saying is that these Germanic horse warriors, by the time they came down, whenever it was 5000 BC, one of the first places that they went to would have been in Scandinavia. And so these people became isolated. They became these very primitive, shamanic people. According to the Romans, they didn't even worship the gods in human form. They didn't have temples. They worshipped at waterfalls and at the bases of trees and rocks and mountains. They were still very shamanically oriented, and so the names of their gods were not the names of like the Greek or the Romans, Aphrodite or Venus, who dressed this way and had this sort of, it was just the energy itself. So they didn't worship Prajapati the husband of the feminine power of creation. They didn't go to that length. They just worshipped Fre, Pra. They just worshipped the power of fertility. We don't know, what does he look like? He's Pra. He's just the power of fertility. You want to worship the feminine, so you worship Freja. Freja is the feminine power of Fre. So that's what I'm seeing. I'm trying to create a history for you for what I think happened. You had Ice Age, post-Ice Age hunter-gatherers who happened to be of a different ethnicity. They were far more primitive in terms of their technology. Their religion probably was much more earth-oriented. They might not even have had a very sophisticated religion. And the reason why I say that is if you look at the oldest, now the proven oldest culture in the world is the Hadzabe. If you want to go look them up, you can go look for them on YouTube. There's all kinds of cool videos about them. The Hadzabe people in Tanzania. They are a language isolate, meaning that there's no other language in the world that is related to their language. They have interbred with other ethnicities around them, but originally they didn't look like your typical African. They had very light skin and they had epithelial folds, so they looked like a combination of everything. And you see this with the Khoisan people, who used to be seen as the oldest people on the planet. If you see, these are the South African, what are those guys called? Anyway, they're desert nomads, and they're called the Khoisan, and they are also a language isolate. Their language isn't related to anything else. Genetically, they're the oldest human beings on the planet, and they represent what might have been the first humans. So the first humans weren't really dark-skinned. They were in the middle, because they don't even look the same. So these Hadzabe were originally ethnically like those people, and their life is, they don't have a religion. They know of the sun and the moon and the stars and the ancestors, and that's it. When somebody dies, they put their body in a cave, and then they just hope that the sun will take them back. They don't even think, once somebody dies, they put their body in a cave and they just move on. They don't do anything. This actually goes back millions of years. Some of the first human-like behavior in pre-human hominids is they started putting bodies in caves. So you're seeing the first human beings. We're looking at a time capsule of these guys, these Hadzabe. We're looking at a time capsule of not just the first human beings, but before the first modern humans. No technology. They wake up every day and they dig for grubs and tubers, and they go and they find something, they kill it, they eat it, they stick it on a fire, they eat it. They don't have, they don't have any tents or any clothing. They sleep under the stars. They get up, they take their bows and arrows and their spears, and they go and they hunt, and that's their whole life. And they have a blast. They love it. And they have no religion. So I'm throwing out the idea, the possibility that in this very primitive jungle-like scenario of northwestern Europe, in these, around 5,000 years ago, in come these olive-skinned, dark-haired, dark-eyed horse warriors. They come in with their technology of the wheel, their use of the horse, their obvious, their other things like that, and farming and raising of domesticated cattle and horses. And they bring this into what would have been very primitive hunter-gatherer people who were racially perhaps very different, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. And these guys intermix, and you get the Germanic people. So what I didn't like before, when I was following the Paleolithic continuity paradigm, what I was saying back then was that language changes very slowly over time, so it doesn't make any sense that you have all these different Indo-European languages that are so different. But the truth is that happens in modern times. So, for instance, English. English is a pidgin language. I mean, it really is. It's a really primitive, pasted together pidgin language. If you took the basic bones of Anglo-Saxon and then threw in some French on top of that, which is just simply Germanic people trying to speak bad Latin, you throw in some French on top of that, and then you get these Vikings who come in who have a similar language, and so Anglo-Saxon and Old Norse, they find the common ground, which means they take out all of the complexity of it, and you just have basically a dumb idiot language. Man, stand here, do this. I mean, that's, when you read Old English and compare it to modern English sounds like, the typical stereotype of the Native American trying to speak English. Me big heaps wampum. It's just, there's no complexity to it. It's just we cut and paste and smash it together, and it's a pidgin language. So I forgot what I was going with all that, but anyway. So getting back to the runes, those are my thoughts. I haven't made any real consensus here, but I like the idea of that. So now when I think of the runes, I think of the sound vibration themselves is what's important. The sound vibrations of the syllables that's been merged into a pre-existing Indo-European language and religion. And you have the two together. It reminds me of Vedic astrology. Vedic astrology is a combination of two astrological sciences. The original astrology that was created in Bactria was adopted by the Vedics. The Vedics came and learned it. The East Indians came and learned this Bactrian astrology. They took it back to India and they merged it with their existing astrology, which was the nakshatras. So those of you Vedic astrologer students of mine, if you're wondering why don't we have nakshatras in Western astrology, it's because that was the indigenous astrology of India, which was just the nakshatras. So the nakshatras form the foundation, and then on top of it, you put the 12 signs and 12 houses and the 7 planets, and then you have Vedic astrology. So that's what I'm saying that the runes are. The runes are, perhaps, the runes are a very primitive, and by primitive I just mean unsophisticated, pure, raw, a very primitive spiritual tradition of using these particular sound vibrations in that particular order. Fehu, Uruj, Thurisaj, Ansuj, and in order to remember it, you put on these Germanic Indo-European words on top of it so that you remember it. And so that to me explains why the runes are not Ansuz, Berchtano, Kenaj, Dagaj, A, B, C, D. And that explains why you don't have runic traditions anywhere in the world in that same way at all. So it's clearly not, the runes clearly are not an Indo-European. So there's only 3 options. 3 options are the runes are an Indo-European tradition that was somehow lost to all the other Indo-European peoples but were retained by the Proto-Germanics, or the runes are, meaning specifically the rune sounds themselves, not the word rune, the rune words, but the sounds, the syllables. The use of those syllables as a magic tradition must have come from the indigenous hunter-gatherers of Europe, who then later were integrated into the Indo-European culture, which resulted in Proto-Germanic. Or they are a relatively modern invention only by the Germanic people, but then we still have this problem of word order. Because if according to to the so-called rune experts who are just spouting academia, which doesn't have any evidence for where the runes came from. They just come to this conclusion that, Germanic warriors came back from the Mediterranean with this alphabet thing and they created the runes. It still doesn't explain why it's in a completely different order and that all the Germanic tribes use that same order. So that's a problem. That's the third one, is that it was created by the Germanic people sometime in the very recent past couple of thousand years, which doesn't make any sense. So those are my thoughts about it. I know it's totally random and all over the place, but there it is. I'm happy to take questions if you have them. Again, if you drop your comment, you're more than likely to get a negative response from me. I like honest questions and honest feelings, but I'll take a look at what's here. Kelly Petrov, welcome. We're not on the same page. You say, what I have heard is that the Rus peoples did not invade India. That's never, I don't know why that's even in your mind, is that was a theory. That's never a theory. The Rus people are Vikings. They're Vikings who traveled up the rivers and conquered the Slavic people, and that's where the word Russia comes from. These Scandinavian invaders ended up adopting the Slavic language, which we now call Russian. But there's nothing about the Rus people invading India except in very recent times. So I don't know what you're talking about. We're talking about 5000 BC. There was no such thing as Rus people in 5000 BC. Okay, so I don't know why. It's good to have an education. I don't know where this is coming from. But went to help their genetics off-world. Okay, so welcome to the channel. I strongly encourage you to actually watch my videos on my channel, because what you're talking about is completely bogus, non-scientific, new age nonsense. Forgive me, this is nothing personal, but it's pure nonsense. Okay? Anunnaki Hebrew, to be more precise, there is no such thing as Anunnaki Hebrew. You are totally mistaken. The Anunnaki are not what you've been told. The Anunnaki is simply the word for the gods that were used by the ancient Sumerian people. And the stories of the Anunnaki, that is simply their mythology of the creation of the world. All that garbage you heard was created by a guy named Zachariah. I think that's his name, Zachariah Sitchin. I think that's how his name is spelled. This is a guy who took pseudo bad history and started writing this science fiction, and this was in the 70s. What you're talking about didn't exist before the 70s. It's all new age nonsense. So I have nothing personal against you. If you want to enjoy my channel, you're going to have science, actual science and history behind you. That garbage doesn't belong here on my channel. So you won't get a positive response from me if you want to have that discussion with me. So watch my videos and see if this is the right channel for you. I wish you nothing but good things. I hope you're not offended by that, but that's not what we do here. All right. Runes led to Sanskrit. No, they didn't. I don't know where you're coming up with this. Are you making this up? Where did you hear this? Runes did not lead to Sanskrit. Very similar to Russian language. That's right, because the Russian language and the Sanskrit language are both descendants of the original Indo-European language. Do some history. Actually do some research. I'm sorry, but this is just pure, utter, uneducated, fabricated nonsense. You don't have any idea what you're talking about. Again, I hope you don't take this personally, but I can't be more clear than that. It's pure nonsense what you're talking about here. Wandering Ponderer, question. Will the whole world still generate the power? What are you talking about? Or should I focus on the seed sound? I don't know what you're talking about. You mean the whole word, or the whole word? Yes. Okay, sorry. I didn't spend the time to read your question properly. Will the whole word, you mean the whole rune word? It's good to really fill out so I know exactly what you're saying. Otherwise, I tend to do what I just did. Will the whole word, you mean the rune, still generate the power? Yes, of course it will. You can focus on just the seed sound itself, or you can focus on the whole word. They both work just fine. Kelly Pitoff, don't come onto my channel and tell me to check out people. We're not going to do that. I don't care who this guy is. If what you're saying is representative of his beliefs, he has no clue what he's talking about. Might be a wonderful person, but whatever he's talking about is pure nonsense. Okay? Complete, total nonsense. What else? Jameson-san, honest feeling. The misconceptions you've outlined regarding Norse runes among friends seems insurmountable. I gave up in talks about ancient wisdoms. It saddens me to not know how to celebrate and share with friends. You mean like the racist neo-heathens, or just the neo-heathens that are just spouting the pure nonsense that even comes from academia? I understand. That's why I wrote my book. I wrote my books for that reason. I have 3 books on runes, and the reason was because as I started getting into this, I thought, in my naivete, I thought that neo-heathens would be a great place for me to go and learn and interact. And as soon as I started interacting with the neo-heathens, it became clear that, there was just so many problems. There was the racism there was the complete lack of education, there was the spouting of conjecture and the regurgitating of the unverified academia. Let me be clear, I'm a big believer in education. I'm a big believer in academia. But academia even has conjecture. So within academia, where they're just spouting conjecture and they don't have anything to back it up, then I call it out. I totally understand where you're coming from. That's why I wrote these books. And I tell people, and it sounds very, very narcissistic of me, but people will say, I got this book and that book, and I say, don't read those books. Don't waste your time. Just read mine. It's not because I think I'm so incredibly special. It's just that the majority of the stuff that's written out there is garbage. It's there's some, it's interspersed with some good stuff. Like there's, to give him credit, I forget the guy's name. But the first guy I started looking at, somebody can remind me of his name. Edred Thorson. I read a lot of his stuff in the beginning. And there's some of the things that he wrote which are very good. And then there's a lot of garbage. So, and unfortunately, unless somebody is educated and has critical thinking, they're not going to be able to know. And so people just understandably buy whatever they're told. I tend not to do that. But if somebody can bring forth any knowledge with critical thinking and with verifiable evidence, I'm happy to learn from anybody. Doesn't matter who they are. All right, Jameson-san question part 2. Alluded to it here as mnemonic device teaching children how to recall. I would be interested in your expanded understanding of what that looked like throughout a Norse person's life. Well, my first book, Rune Shamanism, I laid out what I think may have happened. There's no evidence for it. Let me be clear. There's no verifiable evidence. This could just be my fantasy. It might be wrong. But the interesting thing about it is if you use that model, the model that I give in the first book, Rune Shamanism, if you use that as a way to learn the runes, in my experience, it works extremely well. It's very powerful. And, we have to be clear, spiritual concepts are like that. We could take a spiritual concept from 1,000 years ago, but if we imbue it with actual inspiration, whether we come up with it or whether it's inspired from the gods or whomever, that can still be valid even if it's historically inaccurate. So I want to be clear about that. I teach a specific method of rune knowledge and empowerment, which I intuitively feel was what was going on in Ice Age times, but I can't verify it. And it's totally okay with me if it's not true. It still works. What else? Vincent.thunderwizard.com. He is one of my astrology apprentices. You can go get an astrological reading from him at his website, vincent.thunderwizard.com. So what you just saw me do, I just plugged somebody else's website. I just told you to go to vincent.thunderwizard.com's website. I will do that for anybody listening to me now. How do you get that? You go here. You go two places. You can go to drmanhattan.thunderwizard.com until the 1st, and in that package you will learn how to become a rune certified rune reader. Sorry, not rune, astrology, but runes as well. Runes and Vedic astrology. You can do Vedic astrology readings according to the method that I do it. I will certify you in that, and if you become certified, I'll give you your own website, and I will put you up on the astrology website and your own website. And if you come on the chat and you say, hey, I will plug you, and go to so-and-so's website and get a reading from them. You want to do that? You can go to Dr. Manhattan, get the Dr. Manhattan package, or you can go to lockdown.thunderwizard.com. You can get it there as well. What else? Nothing else. All right, so I babbled back and forth. A lot of new things coming. You know, that I really now, this whole Yamnaya revelation is really changing the way that I see things now. So to give you an understanding, just to give you an understanding of the absolutely world transforming power of this one culture, let me just give you an idea of what that was. 5,000 years ago, in what is now the Ukraine, in that purple area there on the map over here. And again, I hope people can read maps. I forget how uneducated most people are these days. You know, go find out where this is and what it all means. 5,000 BC, sorry, so we're talking 7,000 years ago, at least. 7,000 years ago, we had people all over the world were hunter-gatherers. And so we take for granted cars. We take them for granted that everybody has a car. I can't imagine living without a car. I wouldn't know how to function. Before that, we had horses. So people had horses and carriages, and that's how you got around. And if we think back in time, 100 years, 200 years, 500 years, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, we can't imagine people functioning without horses and carriages. It's just, we just assume it. But it's a technology. It's a foreign technology. It's not what, you know, when the first people, you know, evolved, they didn't have horses. Horses weren't all over the world. There were very few places in the world that you could find horses. And so one of the places that you could find wild horses 7,000, 8,000 years ago was in the Pontic Steppes, which is that purple area right there. It's a grassland that went on forever and ever, and there was all kinds of animals, and there were these guys here. There were these hunter-gatherers who walked around, and they had to, you know, run down prey. So to give you an example of what it was like to be a hunter-gatherer back then, you had to chase down your prey with your feet. One of the Khoisan that I gave you, I told you about the Khoisan earlier. These are the South African, the oldest or the second oldest genetic people in existence, and a language isolate. There's no other language in the world anywhere that is even associated with them. They're an offshoot. They're a window back into time. These people, when they hunt, still today, those that live out in the bush, what they do is there will be, and there's a video on it. If I had a link, I'd give it to you. There's a video. You can watch them do it. They use their hands as sensors to feel for the game. So they'll lock onto an impala or an antelope or something, and then what they do is they use this weird mudra that I can't show. They use this weird mudra, but they're using, for those of you who are training in the lightning qigong, they're using the Lao Gong point, which has a direct connection to the heart. And if you go and if you find that video, you'll see that these guys can feel with their emotions, they can feel what's happening with the prey. It's amazing. And so these guys are walking in the bush, the desert, and they're looking down at the ground, and they're looking for the tracks. And when they find the tracks, they use the palms of their hands and the tracks and everything else to feel. So the impala may be a mile away, but they can feel it. And they start following the tracks, just walking along, following the tracks until they get close. Then when they get close, the impala or whatever it is will see them and will take off running at full speed. And then they calm down and then they stop. But human beings, the reason why you see human beings jogging, it's the weirdest thing. You think about it, all the things we take for granted. I mean, I live by a main street here, so I see people jogging up and down the road all the time. I don't pay any attention to it, except for the fact that it's weird. Why do humans do that? This goes back to those original human beings. The way that they hunted is they jogged. They would find an impala or whatever it was, and they would jog behind it. Of course, the animal would take off running at full speed, and then for short bursts, and then it would stop. And then they'd use the palms of their hands to find where they'd find it, and they'd go. And they get to places where, after a while, they're jogging behind this animal, and the animal starts running out of steam because human beings can jog for 5, 10, 20 miles. They can jog for a long time, but animals can't run at full speed for very long. They run out of steam very quickly. And so this is why we jog. It's part of our evolution. We've been doing it for millions of years. Jog behind these animals until they start running out of steam. And then what they'll do is they'll follow the tracks and they'll see where it has gotten down and rested. The impala will then sit down under a tree and rest. And they'll go and with their hands they'll feel. And then they can't find the tracks, so they start to use their heart center to feel where the animal went. And then they figure out it went this way, and then they start jogging in that direction. Eventually they chase down the impala, and the impala falls down and has a heart attack and dies. Then they'll take the spear out and they'll throw the spear into it, but it's just an energetic thing to hasten the death. And then they do this really beautiful thing where they take the dirt and they start putting it like they're petting the animal, go back to the earth. And then they talk to it and they say, I'm sorry that we're doing this to you. I need to feed my family. And then they send the soul of the animal to a better place. And, when I die, you can eat my flesh, but for now I need to feed my family. It's amazing. These are our ancestors. So you had people like this, I'm assuming, living in Scandinavia 7,000, 8,000 years ago. They were these kinds of people. They might not have even had a religion, for all we know. And 7,000 years ago, in come these horse warriors who dominate, control, co-merge something. And they bring their Indo-European language. And so that's why you have all these different Indo-European languages. That's why you have a Germanic accent. That's why in Germanic languages, P becomes F, for example. Pashu becomes Fehu. That must have been their indigenous language. The accent of their indigenous language must have been that it changed the way, and that's why you have Proto-Germanic. So Proto-Germanic, you can look at it and see, oh, that's almost identical to Sanskrit. There's different pronunciations, but those are the same words. Because here you have these indigenous people that had a different language, that had its own accent, and now they're starting to speak another language. The same way I said French, French people, I got nothing against them personally, but they're so into their language. I mean, they're so full of themselves when it comes to the French language. But the French language is nothing more than Germanic warriors coming in and conquering Gaul, and then adopting the Latin that was being spoken in Gaul. And so instead of Les Miserables, which is how you would pronounce it in Latin, you just give it to Arnold Schwarzenegger and write it out and say, pronounce that phrase, and he's going to go, Les Miserables. And they think that there's some beauty to that language. It's just some uneducated French guy trying to speak, some uneducated Germanic guy trying to speak Latin. So you had that, and that's why French and Spanish, they're the same language, but you can't understand one from the other. You listen to Spanish and then listen to French, you can't understand them. They sound so different because the pronunciation's totally different. So that must have been what happened, that the Germanic languages, so even Proto-Germanic, was just simply these indigenous hunter-gatherers trying to speak, the equivalent of Sanskrit. They're learning this new language and they adopt it and they speak it, and they have their own accent, which changes things like from P's to F's, from Pashu to Fehu. Got it? So meditate on that. So now when I'm watching the video or the television series, what is it? Yellowstone, right? It's really kind of stupid and it's cheesy. But when I'm watching these cowboys do their thing, I'm realizing that what we're looking at is it's so clear. That's those horse warriors. Bear in mind, horses didn't exist in the world. Wagons didn't exist. So I was trying to tell you, but what I find so interesting about it, here's how we got to be riding horses all the time. Is that you had these hunter-gatherers who had their feet like everybody else, except for the guy on the horse. They were these two guys. And these guys were living in this giant grassland. That's their home. And they're chasing down all of the animals. They're chasing down the antelope and the whatever the hell is out there. And horses. So horses were their primary prey, because that was the dominant animal out there. Big herds of horses. Native Americans chased after American buffalo. These guys chased after herds of horses. That's why their religion became so focused on the horse. And so what they learned to do then was, instead of chasing them down with their bows and arrows and their spears, they decided to domesticate them. So they started making these giant corrals, and they'd have herds of horses in these corrals, and they'd domesticate them, and then they'd breed them. So the horses would become more and more mellow. And then for thousands of years, they didn't ride horses. For thousands of years, what they did was they milked horses. They lived off of horse milk. So the same way that we live off of cow's milk, they lived off of horse milk. And so then somebody had the bright idea to start riding the horses. And when they learned that they could then tame the horse and learn how to ride them, and then they started breeding horses that would let you ride them. After thousands of years of living like this, then you have these guys who have this technology that nobody else has. They're sitting on top of horses, and they've got the upper hand because they're above you. So with their spear or with their axe or with their just their tree trunk, as they come by you, pop, they can just take, one guy can take out a whole army just on horseback, just with his sword or whatever he's using. Doesn't matter. Just give him any kind of blunt weapon and he's going to win the battle. And then you create this thing called the wheel. And you figure out that you can make these things like chariots, and you can then have some guy sitting in a chariot being pulled along by a horse, and he's got this shield in front of him, and he's shooting arrows from horseback or behind this thing, and they start to, that's what happens. That's why when you look at this, you see the arrows going in all directions. It's exactly like when the United States came up with nuclear weapons. The moment that they came up with nuclear weapons, they were the superpower. They now were the most powerful country on the planet. And these guys, they automatically became the most powerful culture in the world overnight once they perfected this technology, and there was nothing that could stop them. That's why you see it looks like an explosion. Arrows are going in all directions. So, as much as I don't like it, that's where we come from. But now that I see that, and I take the dislike that I have about the conquest and the slaughter that must have happened to indigenous peoples, and the enslavement of indigenous peoples and all of that stuff that must have happened. Maybe it didn't happen every time. Maybe there were other ways. Maybe it was mutually. Who knows? But there was certainly the archaeological evidence is very clear. You find a lot of people with big giant holes in their heads, the size of an axe. So it's pretty clear what happened. But when I get that aside and I think about how revolutionary it must have been, now when I watch this TV show about these cowboys, I'm seeing these Indo-European horse warriors, and I get it. I get why the Germanic people worshipped Odin riding his horse. Why Sleipnir? And I had an experience that I will never forget. I was living in Idaho, over 10 years ago. And across the street, because it was out in the suburbs then, people like in the suburbs there in Boise, people have horses. So it's not like normal, you drive down the street and there's a house here. Across the street is a horse corral and a house. So I would go out into my front area, which I had planted a bunch of trees, and there were some existing trees, and I do my rituals there, and I do it under the moonlight. And so I could hear the horses, across the street, sort of walking around, and in their pasture there. And under my breath, I would speak Odin's name under my breath. If you were standing next to me, you wouldn't have heard me. But I just simply would chant the word Odin. And the horse would whinny or neigh every single time. Every single time. And so the Germanic people had this religion where they had pastures for horses. And the horses like that were pure white, nobody touched. And they lived in these pastures. And the priests would go and they would ask Odin questions, and the horse would tell them, by the way that they whinnied or whatever they did. And when I first read that, I thought that was cute until I experienced it. Just try it. Anybody who has access to a horse, try it. Just stand anywhere, you can be 100 yards away and just say Odin under your breath and watch what the horse does. The horse will respond. And I learned how to get Odin to respond to me based on, I understand exactly how it happened. So when you talk to cowboys or when you talk to people who have horses and they talk about this connection that the horse has, that is something that was created over thousands of years of co-mingling between humans and horses. That bond between the human and the horse. This is why, you don't believe me? Go try and ride a zebra. Zebras cannot be domesticated. You can't turn them into horses, even though they're just African horses. They won't let you ride them, none of that. This takes thousands of years. There's a spiritual and genetic factor that happens, that's been bred into horses and humans as well. And this is what these people brought. They brought this revolutionary technology that was even more powerful than the invention of the nuclear bomb. Anyway, I find all that very interesting. What else? Dean Nevin's question, is your current conclusion on the runes in Sanskrit developed independently? My current conclusion is that the runes themselves, I think, might have been independent of Sanskrit. Yes. The language, obviously, the words, fehu, all the ones that we've mentioned, except for ones we don't know. I don't think we know where Perthro came from. Ing, obviously, Ing is Agni. So I don't think the words are independent. I think that the science of using these syllables is independent of the Sanskrit, because Sanskrit, the Vedics also worshipped seed sounds. So it's not that they didn't have the same understanding, but they had their language was their consonants, the K sound. There's 3 or 4 different letters. I don't know how many. There's multiple letters for one sound. The N sound, the R sound. There's multiple letters and slight variations, which Indo-European was an incredibly complex language. So I'm thinking that the Germanic, the pre-existing indigenous Germanic language must have been perhaps more simple. The syllables, because you don't have, you only have so many letters in the runic alphabet. But in Sanskrit, you have far more letters, because each one, a K sound, is it a K sound? Is it a KH sound? Is it a voiced or aspirated? I mean, just taking one consonant, it's broken up in so many ways. The runes aren't. It's very clear. It's just futhark, whatever those few things. So I'm thinking that's what the indigenous language was. It was a simpler language that didn't have as many variants. And that's what the runes reflect. Because otherwise, if the runes were Indo-European, the futhark the futhark alphabet would be much longer. But it's not. All right, so I don't know if I answered your question or not. Kayla Lynn Kruger, I don't know what you're talking about. Are you the person that was talking earlier about what I was saying was nonsense? No, that was Kelly. Why are you telling me this strange fact about yourself? Oh, okay, you don't have a horse. Okay, all right. This is what I mean. It's just throwing out these vague, I don't know what to do with them. I don't know what it means. Impetus. Correspondent question, could the runes have descended and evolved into the Brahmi script? No. Why would that? Doesn't make any sense at all. Why would that happen? Look at the map here. Okay, again, guys, it's painful for me when people don't use their brains. Look at the map. The purple part is where the Indo-European language came from. All of the arrows are where it went. Do you see a direct arrow coming from Scandinavia going down into India? I don't either. The Sanskrit language and the Germanic language are offshoots of an original language. So how can runes evolve into Brahmi script? You got this thing here. You can use it. It's called a brain. Stop, use it. What are the 2 most important things in life? I keep telling you. Pay attention and put effort. So you weren't paying attention. Lion of Apollo, question. Have you ever heard both secular and Christian academics say that the symbolism of our Indo-European spirituality is just technology worship? I haven't, and I don't know what the hell that means. I don't know what that means. Just technology worship? Come on. Obviously, even if I had heard it, what do you think my response would be to that? It shows such a closed mind. And it doesn't make any sense either. Oh, I already started talking about it. Okay. Kayla Lynn Kruger, what are you doing? If you wanna interact intelligently with me, I'm happy to do that. There are two things I want. One is an honest question. So that means you have to actually have some knowledge of what I'm teaching, which means watch some of my videos, really spend some time learning, do some of the things that I tell you to do, and then you'll have an educated question that you can ask honestly, and I'll be able to respond. Otherwise, what are you just typing in whatever fall out of your head? I want more from you than that. This isn't just some place to waste your time. I mean, you're welcome here, but I really want you to spend some time here. So I'm going to put you in a timeout because you're not really adding to any real conversation or discussion. I'm not going to block you. I'm just going to put you in a timeout. You can't be listening to what I'm saying and typing at the same time. What else? I mean, I appreciate you were giving me compliments there, but it doesn't add to the discussion. Anything else? Nothing else? No, nothing else. All right, so I don't know how I feel about this. I didn't really give out the thoughts in a very coherent manifestation. I was just sort of letting my brain sort of fart all over the place here, but we'll talk about it some more. Bottom line is I'm rethinking my understanding about things based on the objectifiable, verifiable evidence, which I wish the majority of the population did. I wish that all of the Trump-loving, uneducated people would do that. We wouldn't have nearly any of the problems that we have. All right, that's it for me, guys. I will see you next time I see you. Remember, Dr. Manhattan special is expiring July 1st. drmanhattan.thunderwizard.com. Save $6,000. Other than that, go to the 90-day Warrior Lightning Qigong and subscribe. And we're starting a new series, which is in the Manifestation Mastery course, which you also can get at thunderwizard.com. And I'll be breaking down to you exactly how to manifest how you can manifest what it is that you truly desire with no effort. We're going to go into depth talking about that. I'm going to start uploading private videos to the thunderwizard.com explaining exactly what that is, but you can go there right now and get started on the free videos that I've posted there for you. Yes, Lion of Apollo, I got that. I get what you're saying. I understood that. Yeah, we're both in agreement about that. That whole worship of technology thing is pure garbage. All right, that's it for me. I'm all done. I'll see you guys when I see you. Have a great, whatever the heck it is, morning, evening, afternoon. I'll see you next time.